to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. My guest today on the Online for Authors podcast is Mark Jamilkowski, author of the book The Road to Moresco. Mark is a first-time author, a co-founder of a healthcare startup, a husband, and father. In my book review, I stated The Road to Moresco is a story about Maria-Luisa Moresco and then her daughter Claire. As a woman in the early 1900s, Maria-Luisa was ahead of her times and wanted more than the traditional life of motherhood. Unfortunately, her life was not easy, and the reader follows her as she pushes her way forward despite such things as earthquakes, war, and murder. Her daughter lived with these consequences and suffered her own difficult journey. The story and characters were really good. The historical research that went into the novel is also phenomenal. However, Mark had a difficult time intertwining the story with the history. I often felt like I was reading a great novel interrupted by a strong history lesson, which is something we will discuss. Nonetheless, the story is a wonderful portrayal of strong women in a time when women were meant to be something else. Hello, today on Online for Authors, I have Mark Jamilkowski, author of The Road to Moresco. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me, Terry. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. I enjoyed the book, and I have some things I really want to talk with you about, particularly a lot with the research. But before we get into this, I want you to just kind of give everyone your elevator speech as to what is The Road to Moresco about.
Sure. The Road to Moresco follows the life and times of a mother who, starting in their 1920s time period, has to struggle to define herself and to, in essence, establish herself in a society that was against women having professions. She had to struggle through World War II, a whole bunch of personal traumas, and an unplanned pregnancy, which her daughter then becomes the second half of the story. And we follow the impact that her mother's life had on the daughter all the way through the daughter's life. So it's a combined saga, family saga, if you will, of the mother and daughter, or of course, across about 150 years worth of history. And it's meant to basically tie together and help people find inspiration in the various elements that these people went through. How did they survive and persevere against these traumas? There's elements there where the history itself is actually another character in the book,
right?
Which was, sort of, I felt the context of it was important. And I think the one other element here, a little twist that is important to understand, is the book was born out of a biography, really, because I got to meet the daughter.
Okay.
And in meeting the daughter and learning more about her and her life and the stories that she was telling me about what her life was like, as I almost started becoming an investigative reporter as I was asking her questions. And she would tell me about these events that happened. I'm like, really?
Could that be true?
Could that really have happened? Really? So, you start digging in. You have to really find, this kind of goes into your other point about research. You really have to go in and try to find sources that will even talk about what that time period of life was like.
Right.
And triangulate around and try to, in essence, find the truth, which I try to do as diligently as I could. So in summary, and a long summary.
That's quite all right.
I think of the book as historical fiction because there are enough elements of fiction that were required in order to weave the story together. I don't know for certain where her mother was born. I don't know for certain where she went to school. I don't know for certain what conversations were had with which people at which time, and and what her experiences were exactly when. I don't have a diary to go against and create a memoir, and it's to be a true biography. So as a result, I have these landmarks, the landmarks which tie to historical events.
Right.
And that creates the outline for the story, and the rest of it is storytelling.
Right. So you met this woman.
Yeah.
Give us a little more, like how, like where did this come from? Because, my first book, Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, was also because I met someone who told me a story. Mm-hmm. And her story was so compelling. It was a little 3-page story. It was nothing, but it was so compelling that I created 82,000 words of fiction so I could tell that 3 pages. Yeah. And so I'm always curious, like, how did you meet this person, and what it was that actually made you say, aha, this should be written down?
Okay. The actual how I got to meet Clara is a little bit of a twist in the book, mm-hmm. that if I'm pushed, I'll divulge. But
you don't have to. That's okay, all right. Right. I won't make you. But so you met Claire. So,
since you've read the book, I have a quick question for you. Yeah. Were you surprised by the twist? It was a while ago, so I mean, I don't know.
I mean, yes and no. I think that I was invested enough in the characters that it was just like there were lots of turns.
Yeah.
In the book, so I don't feel like there was any one that stood out to me as bigger than another.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, sure. Like as I'm reading it, it was like, oh, there's another good one. Yeah. So, so yes, you do not have to divulge. Right. That's fine. That's
fine. I have a person who is a friend of mine, lives in our building. I live in New York City. Yeah. So, lives in the building, heard about the book, got the book. And she comes up after me and she goes, I have a bone to pick with you. Every time I thought I was safe, it turns again. Yes. Something else happens.
Yes. But and I think that was part of the history that they were living in as well. So
it's so tumultuous.
Every time that your characters felt like they were safe, they mm-hmm. were finally steady, something else would come along and, knock them completely off their pillars again. Yeah. Yep,
exactly. Yeah. So meeting Clara, who's the daughter,
right,
was it was partly serendipitous in terms of how that meeting came about, and the willingness of her to even engage in conversation. It wasn't really, she didn't have to. She was under no obligation to. But we ended up striking up a little bit of a relationship that we kind of found pleasure in. And as I learned more about her background, it was inspiring to me. So to your point that you were just making, after I finished I started jotting down notes. I couldn't keep track. There's so many things going on. So many people, so much going on, this, that, and the other. You're here. Wait, now you're over there. Wait, now you're over here. And now that's happening. And now this is happening. I couldn't keep track, and made an outline. And I started every time I talked with her, after I finished talking with her, I would take notes against my outline, trying to fill in the gaps, like try to keep the story straight. So if you think about it in modern day technology terms, it would be sort of like keeping a really comprehensive sales force, like catalog of all your touch points with a client.
Yeah.
Right. I was just keeping track. I was just trying to keep track. And then after I started doing the research and finding out more about it, I was just like, I have to tell this story. Other people have to know this story. This has to get out.
So did you talk to her about that?
I let her know that I was thinking about writing the story, but unfortunately she got sick.
Okay.
And passed away while I was still kind of toying with the idea. I didn't go to school for writing. I haven't taken any writing classes. My style of writing and my quote unquote skill at it, right, it only comes about from being in a consulting kind of business environment for over 3 decades, where your ability to communicate clearly and succinctly was honed over time. And it's only by virtue of that steadfast editing. Okay, yeah, I'm a bit of a bookworm. I love reading, and
so you get a lot from that, because I feel the same.
Yeah.
I do not have a lot of coursework or things under my belt, but I have read and read and read and read, and so you do kind of know what makes a good story.
Yeah,
exactly. So as you're writing, you can say, yes, this is making a good story.
Right,
you
have
that, yeah.
And then, and as a result of, silly things about this, Terry. So I go through this whole thing. I got this whole outline, right? And by the way, I'm partially Italian, so I got it.
It's all right. I'm not, and I still talk with my hands, so it's okay.
So I got this outline, and I blow this outline out, and I realize I've got 18 pages of outline. And 18 pages of outline, if I did a good job researching and really filling it out, should equate to about 160 pages of something. Mm-hmm. Something. I don't even know what to call it. Right? And I figured, well, I'll get it to there because that's what's in me. I'll get it to there and I'll share it with people. I went on one of those apps that connects you with your neighbors.
Yeah.
Right. And I just said, I got a side project. Who wants to read it and let me know if it's worth anything? And are you a ghostwriter and are willing to take it and run with it? Because that was really what I thought, right? I'd done research. I thought maybe I put together a reasonable book report, and somebody can take it and make a
and
story
now do
out
something
of it.
with it, right?
Right. And the first person who read it said, "Do you know who Saul Bellows is?" And I was like, "Nope, not on my reading list." Yeah. And she's like, "Go to the library, get some of his books, read, and come back. Let's talk some more." So I did, and succinct novella type of stories, very exquisite settings. The way the emotions and environment were set through his choice of words and his phrasing and how he structured. I was like, wow, she's like, you write like him. And I was like, this guy is a Pulitzer Prize winning Nobel. But you can't tell. It's like, don't tell me I write like this guy. It's like, now you have lost all your credibility. You've lost all your credibility. So I really wasn't believing the feedback, is what it comes down to. And so I showed it to other people, and they're like, you should really tell the story. You should tell the story. I'm not going to write this for you. You should tell it. So that's what started the journey, and I didn't know where to go. I had no idea what to do next. How do I make 160 pages of stream of consciousness
into a novel,
into something that will actually be publishable?
Right.
I figured on the outside, Terry, I just figured someone's going to say, "You're cute. All right. So print off like 10 copies at Kinko's or whatever, FedEx, right? And give it to your relatives for a Christmas present. It's a good novelty, and then be done with it. Shake your hands off, walk away. Nice effort." But they weren't letting me. They would not let me go.
Mm-mm. No, because it's a great story.
I appreciate
it is a great story. Yeah.
And I'll tell anybody. Cynthia Stone from Treaty Oak Publishers. I just bumped into her again. A moment of serendipity. I'm in Austin. I'm on a business trip, attending a conference, health insurance conference. Like, good God.
Totally unrelated, right?
Yeah, good. It's like, please don't bore me any further. And I'm walking. I've been to Austin so many times. I know the city well. I'm walking around, and in the distance, I see white tents down by the Capitol building. Now, this is Austin, Texas. I'm expecting a barbecue.
Right.
And if it's not a barbecue,
a beer
choice number
garden,
2
something
is
like
a
that,
beer
right?
garden, or
Yeah.
oh, that's a good choice. That's choice 3 probably. It was either going to be a barbecue or a farmer's market.
Right.
That's what I'm expecting, right? Walk down the hill, approach the tent. It's a bunch of people milling about books. I pop in the first tent and I say, what's going on? No, this is the annual Austin Book Fair. I had no idea. I wasn't in town for that. I wasn't, I said, huh. And the woman who's talking to me says, well, this tent is the publisher's tent. And then that tent's the children's tent. And over there were people doing presentations. I'm saying, wait, what tent is this? This is the publisher's tent?
You walked right into the publisher's tent.
So I got this project, I say, and I describe it. And she goes, oh, you have a manuscript. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that would be the word.
That's what I have. I have a man. Sure, let's go with that. And she said, listen, I'll read it and we'll see. We'll read the typical publisher. First 5 pages, right? So she read the first 5. She said, show me the first chapter. Show her the first chapter. She goes, okay, I want to read chapter 2, which tells me you've got enough storytelling skills here to get me hooked. Let's work together. We'll do 1 chapter at a time. I don't want to read the whole thing. We're just going to work on 1 chapter at a time, and then we'll see how it all falls together. And that's what we did. We worked on it for about a year. And she taught me editing things, like my first draft had something like 741 uses of the word had.
Oh, yeah. So I put mine through just one of these apps, that will find those kinds of things for you. And I do that before I give it to my editor so that she doesn't, roll her eyes at me. Yeah. And it's like, Terry, do you know how many times you used the word, for instance, big? And it's like, that is such a weak, nothing should be big. It needs to be, enormous. You have to have words, right? And then it's like, 17 times in the first 3 chapters, you said big. And it was like, because the way I think and get my words out is very different than the editing process afterward.
I think there's some value to that, though.
I think there is.
I've since doing this, I've talked with some others who go through the process of taking courses and whatnot, and they seem to complain about writer's block a lot. And I can't help but think that to some extent that's caused because they're trying to conform to the rules that they know exist while they're writing.
Right.
Whereas I didn't know any different. And I was just like, here's a bunch of words.
I tell people all the time. I tell people all the time, I shouldn't say any. I do very little editing while I am writing.
Yeah.
Every now and then I might go back and think, I don't like that, and change it. But generally I have, and I call it word vomit, where I just kind of sit and I just and let it all out. Yeah. Okay. Is that better than word vomit? You like that better? And so once it's all out, then I go back and I say, okay, how can I clean this mess up and turn it into something that I could actually show someone, get it to the point that I wouldn't feel embarrassed to show it to an editor. And that's when you go back and you fill in the holes and you realize that, you've used big way too many times and that you keep changing tenses throughout your whole thing, and that, you're both in present, past, and, future tense, just depending on what you're thinking at the moment. And so all of those things, and I read somewhere, and it was someone famous who said it, I don't remember, but they said you can't edit a blank page. And that's kind of the way I go about it, is let's get it out of me. And once it's out of me, now we can go and make it pretty.
It's even better. Like, you can get it out, you get it down, it's cleared from your mind, you put it aside and come back to it.
I put mine aside for several weeks, and I just don't even think about it.
And you reread and you're like, what was I thinking?
Notes, lots of notes.
How did I change the characters' names 3 times? I mean, what? It's like, wait, that doesn't follow. You know why I had to develop that family tree, that exhibit? I lost track.
Yeah.
I'm changing people's names. I'm like, this person should be called this. I'm like, oh no, wait, I've already named them that.
Wait a minute. Yeah. No, and that happens. And there are times when I'm writing where I want to reference someone that I've brought up before, but they're not a major character, and I can't remember what I named them. So I give them a description, grocer that lives in Burnsville. And then I highlight it in yellow and keep going because I don't want to go back and start sifting to find out what I named him, whether he was George or Scott or whatever I put down. Like I have no clue. And so that same kind of thing where you just, and then when you go back and you read, it's like, oh, well, I've changed the main character. Her husband has 3 different names. Which one do I want to give him? You know?
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I'm a little curious about this.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this in any way because I don't think it should be done. I just want to make that really clear. But you're a man and you're writing about strong women characters. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe that men can't write women or women can't write men. I am not of that ilk at all. But I do want to know, how was it difficult for you to get into the head of these strong women being a man? I mean, well, I know that when I write male characters or when I write children characters, it's a little tougher for me than writing a woman character of my age.
I tried to channel. So here again, I think this is one of those situations where, because I haven't been schooled in character development.
Yeah.
I don't know how to flush out elements. It was good that this was my first book.
Okay.
Because I had so much fact to go on.
Okay.
And in knowing Clara and how Clara would respond, and having people in my own family that Clara reminded me of, and knowing what their personalities were and drawing on that familial kind of connection, understanding the culture, you know, sort of that European, Italian kind of mindset, all feeds into it. But it only goes so far. The last piece, you know, that last mile is really much more of myself, because that's the only thing I have to go on to fill in the blanks.
Right.
As a result, there's a lot of autobiography woven in to the book, because I wasn't, you know, I just,
that's what you know.
That's what I know. That I couldn't just like pick fictitious facts and make a character out of my head. I was just relying on, okay, well, we meet a young boy named Marcello who's playing with sticks in the water that is running like a river down the side of the street after a heavy rain. Well, yes, that's what I did too. Right. I think, it's interesting. I've stuff had like that.
Yeah. I've had people say to me, like, are you in any of your characters? And it's like, I'm kind of in all of them.
All of them. Right.
I'm all of them. Now, it's not me. It's not completely me.
Right. It's just a piece.
It's other things I've seen from other people, but there's me that runs through every single one of them. And it's either me as I used to be, me as I currently am, and sometimes there's me as I wish I was.
Okay.
I'll look and I'll say, if I could be more like that, what would I do? Well, this is what I would do. If I were a little braver, if I were a little,
very much like a Shostakovich kind of situation.
Yeah.
If I was in this situation and I didn't do this, but if I could do it again and I had
this is what I would do.
This is what I would do.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that kind of feeling. So yeah, that's interesting.
And then as far as being a woman or trying to portray, I mean, the whole story is done from more of a narrative perspective. Right. I never would, I just never felt bold enough to be able to say and put myself actually in the character voice in that moment in time.
If you could rewrite it, like just like a portion of it, do you think you'd be able to go back now that you've had that character live in your head and do an I? It might be a fun something to try for you, just to see if you can get into the character of a woman.
I'm actually contemplating doing that with my new effort.
Good. Yeah.
But as far as this one's concerned, when Clara was struggling to protect her children during the riots in New Haven as part of the social unrest and the social unrest of the 1970s, I channeled my role as a father.
Right.
what would how would I be feeling?
Right.
What kind of, and that type of stuff. The elements of frustration that any character is feeling, I'm drawing on it from that perspective. Did I miss elements that would be strictly and identified solely with being a woman? Sure. Without giving too much away, Clara has to have a hysterectomy as part of a cancer treatment. I can't attest to everything that she was going through with that. But having read the story, that was actually a back seat to a much bigger challenge that she was facing.
Exactly. So yeah, no, like I said, I think you did a great job. It wasn't that. I was just curious because I know that I'm very dialogue driven. Mm-hmm. When I write, I like dialogue. And I'll
give you a quick little secret, and it probably wasn't obvious. It was to an experienced author such as yourself, but when I first wrote it, it was 160 some odd pages of just pure writing.
Just pure writing, no dialogue,
not a single word of dialogue in there whatsoever. And the first thing my editor said, so she said, "Okay, we see this paragraph right here where you're telling and not showing."
Telling.
So we have to, if you're going to keep this paragraph, we have to work on making this paragraph a showing, not a telling.
Yes.
I'm like, what are you talking about? What?
Can you give me some examples?
What? She goes, "I'm not writing this book for you. You have to figure this out." So she's like, the work on the first chapter to kind of get through that took us almost 8 weeks. And then I took what she gave me from chapter 1 and I applied to chapter 2 before I gave it back.
Before you gave it to her. Right.
And then she gave me edits on chapter 2. Now I got chapter 1, chapter 2 experience in the mail. I applied those to chapter 3 before by the time we got to chapter 7, she wasn't making anywhere near as heavy as the edits are concerned. Right. And I was in the flow. Right. I went through author school. Well, like I said, this is why I give Cynthia a lot of credit for the patience and the passion that she put into me and helping me to get through it and getting me all set up and helping me get it out there.
So let's talk a little bit about research, because you went through 150 years and you went through some very
technically longer. I mean, I went back to 1860.
Right. So, 200 years. So, and you went through some very specific time periods that held a lot of history to them. Mm-hmm. How difficult was the history, or do you like doing research, first of all? Like, is that something that you enjoy?
Yeah. So I think part of why this book even came about was I've always been a big fan of after college, when I didn't have to write in papers
exactly
or pay attention to what a teacher was saying. I found myself actually liking history. Right. In particular, I think that reading about certain things that opened my eyes to additional elements of history. I remember being on vacation. My son was young, and so he slept in late. And we're on vacation, so I got my book, and I go down to the beach. I get my cup of coffee, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sun's just coming up, and no one's around. It's all very quiet. I can do some reading. Right. So what am I reading? I'm reading Alexander the Great. Right. Why? Well,
because it's a good beach read.
Why not? Exactly. It's a good beach read. And I find myself, I want to draw the maps. I want to understand better where he traveled and how he did it and how it relates to current day maps and what does it all mean. And one of the most fascinating parts about all that was how he took people from where he left and he brought them to where he was going. And then he brought people from where he went to the next place. And he kept cross-pollinating. And he was a big fan. And even though he was a young man, he understood that we all benefited from understanding different perspectives.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, Alexander the Great. We're talking 330 BC. Well, this tells me that all of the dates and people and places and times that I had to memorize and regurgitate weren't telling the full story.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what then I sort of the engine started turning, and I started wanting to know more about it. I would say one of the more influential books in terms of how I think about when I'm reading, trying to apply some critical thinking to some of this stuff. I think of Benny Morse. He wrote a book called Righteous Victims. Basically, it's a story about the Middle East, and it's all the history of the Middle East and how everybody's right to be mad, and everybody's right and they're all wrong at the same time. Yeah. So it's and why, right? It's fascinating, but in the style he took, he didn't actually take a stance. He just was telling the points of view and how those points of view develop. So, for example, talking about research, okay, I've got this young woman who wants to be a concert pianist, 1930s Italy, going, well, where's she going to go? I don't know where she went to school, right? But where could she have gone?
Right.
Well, the main university in Venice, Ca' Foscari, was known for their music program and their arts program. Okay, well, it's not unreasonable that she would end up there, right? She could have been in Rome for all I know. I mean, okay. What's the attitude? What's going on? 1930s Italy. We all know about Mussolini,
right?
But why was the country so fervent about their nationalism? What made them ripe for that entire fascist movement? Well, that's a much bigger question. Now you start to unpack a whole bunch of stuff. Well, where did those people get that idea? Well, Mussolini is influenced by this guy who came before him. And okay, well, if you got this guy D'Annunzio, who's dropping leaflets in Vienna to tell the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, we can get to you. Where did he get his inspiration from? And you just keep peeling his back and keep peeling his back, which is why I said, listen, I have to at least, there's 2,000 years of history here, right, that lead to this moment. So the prologue, that's why I have like 4 pages in the prologue that basically say, here's how we get to 1860.
Here's how we get to where we are, right? Because if I keep going back, my book's going to be several thousand pages long, and just don't need that. So I tell everyone that I'm a research junkie. And that's, I have a hashtag, I use it, research junkie. And so whenever I, dive down rabbit holes, and that's what happens is I research one thing, and that's very interesting, and something will be said, and I'll think, ooh. And so I'll research that thing. And before long, I am down some maze of, and it might not even be super related anymore to my original search, because now I've done this thing that I'm just all over. And so, I figured in order to understand all of those eras, you had to have done a lot of research. Did you do most of it online, or did you actually go, to Italy or to Vienna? Did you do any of that, or is it?
So a wonderful thing about Google Maps.
Yes, I love Google.
you can literally drop yourself on a street and look around and walk down that street pretty much anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't actually
get to go. Right.
I did not get to go. But I did walk the streets of the town in Italy called Moresco. I did walk the streets in the town called Monterubiano. I traveled around the Marche region quite a bit to try to get a feel for, what it could have been like. I did travel around Venice. Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of that way.
Right. Virtual traveling.
Virtual travel, right. And to your point, though, like about one thing being mentioned and then driving in a different direction, Ingrid Bergman, in his autobiography, has a whole chapter about Maria-Luisa Moresco. He uses a pseudonym for her. He changed her name, but it's like
everyone knows.
Everyone knows, right?
Right.
Right. It would be, yeah. It's like, oh, I'm going to call you Susan Brown and talk about you. Like, okay. So it was like that, and in his book, he mentions that Ingmar Bergman. I always.
That's right.
Ingmar Bergman. In his autobiography, he mentions that Maria-Luisa would show photographs of these grand estates that they were at parties, and she would be naming all of these dignitaries, musical dignitaries, at these parties. This is like 1950s, late 1940s. Where are these parties taking place?
Right.
So we followed her life, and here we are, late 1950s, early 1960s, hanging out with Ingmar Bergman and Kabi Laratai, and they're looking at these old black and white photographs. She's a young woman. Clara, her daughter, is a small infant. Well, that had to have been before World War II. Where did that take place?
Right.
So, and then say, okay, well, she was at the time married to Max Strub, world famous classical violinist. So now I have to find out about his life. So finding out about his life, actually, it's unfortunate. His daughter and her husband, who live in England, I think they may still be alive. They wrote a biography about Max, which was done in old school way. It's not it has an ISBN, but you can't find it because it's out of print.
Right.
And it was never digitized. So completely unavailable. And the only information about it is through Wikipedia.
Right. So a couple of paragraphs here and there somewhere, right?
Something like that. Exactly. Yeah. My coworkers were like, the end of the world is upon us. Wikipedia actually made it into a bibliography. I was like, listen,
it is what it is.
It is what it is. But I'll tell you what, Wikipedia got me to see articles in archive.org and JSTOR and all these other places that I would have never known to go look. So to me, it was an invaluable thing, and I still contribute every month. But finding out about Max and Max's life, which was huge, by the way, it could be like the whole biography by itself. But I'm not so invested in Max. I'm trying to follow Maria-Luisa. What the hell's going on? Turns out he spent a lot of time in Weimar. Okay. What's so famous about Weimar? Why are all these castles in Weimar? It turns out that Weimar, even though it's in the middle of Germany, is not unlike Southampton or the Hamptons here in New York State.
Right. And that's where everyone goes if you're wealthy.
All the rich people went and had their big estates, and they hung out and they partied, and they basically went from one party to another party, and they didn't have polo matches per se, but they were out hunting. They were shooting at stuff. Yeah. And that was their part. That was their thing. And this is what they did. And they had these big parties. And so I'm finding out about all this stuff. And I know the thread right now. Well, where did these castles come from? And what's going, all of that. Right. And one of the things I actually scrubbed a lot of details back. I know one of the challenges I had with the book, writing it, was sometimes the history and so many of those facts were just so some of the details of what's happening were important, but to really tell those details would detract from the development of the characters in the story.
Right.
So trying to find that balance.
And so that kind of brings me to my one thing. I loved the story.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and this is my one thing that I wanted to talk with you about, and we discussed that before bringing you on, so I'm not like blindsiding him anybody. He knows. Is sometimes I felt like I was reading a novel, and then I put the novel down and I picked up a history textbook. Yeah. And I read my history textbook for a while, and I put my history textbook down and I picked up my novel again. Yeah. And that would be my main concern with the book is that you're right. There is a lot of history, and it was very necessary. And I'm sure that you did scrub a lot. And there probably was a way to incorporate some of that history a little more into what was happening. There's one that sticks out in my mind in particular. It's after the war. I don't even know where we are. We're in Germany somewhere. And you start talking about these missiles that would come up out of the ground.
The beginning of the Cold War, the ballistic missiles.
Right. Right. And so, and you went into some pretty good detail about these missiles and their names and which ones were happening and numbers and things. Right. And quite frankly, I kind of went and moved on because I wanted to get back to the book. Yeah. And my thought is how could we have brought this into the story? And if it were me, and I'm a different writer than you, very different. And so, this might not work for you, but what I would have done is instead of talking about it, I would have had your characters see it. They would have been walking and one of these came up or they came up over the bank and they saw or whatever. Yeah. And then I don't know, discussed it with whoever they were with or something along that line. And you could have brought in a lot of that in a way that it didn't feel like.
That's a good idea. Where were you 2 years ago?
And so several times, that's the one that stuck with me. But there were several times where I did feel like. I may
steal that because I am working on, sort of on the side, working on a second edition where I'm trying to smooth some of those edges.
Yeah, so that would be my thought is whenever you're getting into what's more than about a paragraph of history, is finding a way for your character to interact with it.
So the reason, and this because I'm too close to it, right? Being born in the 60s, and this Cuban Missile Crisis, Cold War, all of that effect, and trying to begin to lay the groundwork for the PTSD and the stress and anxiety.
Exactly.
Ultimately, that becomes a critical element of the relationship that Clara will have with her then GI husband.
Right.
No, where did that come from?
Right. No, see, and I agree that you needed to have it.
How it experienced it, how it got experienced.
I think that if we had seen more experience with it, as opposed to it being this thing we were told about, and then your characters went about doing their character thing.
Maybe as part of the because we talk a little bit about I'm talking a bit about the GIs and how they are mechanics or what they're doing to support the troops. Maybe having them go to work on a silo or something.
So that you see it.
Yeah.
Or her husband is a GI, right?
Right.
And so, maybe we follow him for just a day in the life of him, and you just see what he's doing so that when he has his PTSD and all the other things happen later.
That's interesting. So it's like it's a whole different chapter, sort of like a day in the life of. And
right.
So
and
it
could
idea of what he's working on and what his instructions are.
Right. And then because of that, you might not have to have all of the history in a different section. It could be woven into him, and then you bring him in and her, and then
you bring him back into the story.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean that's just my and I do things differently, and
that's a great idea. Again, where were you 2 years ago?
Right here, sitting right here in this house. Well, that brings us very naturally to what's next. You've alluded to it a few times. What are you working on?
So oddly enough, I was stressing a lot. So you have to understand, again, not being an author and all this and going through this whole process, right? And then Cynthia is very nice, very comforting, getting me through the whole process. KDP, all loaded up, ready to go. She goes, all you got to do now is press that little button that says publish. And I was like, okay, sure. Yeah, like, no problem. Get online. I'm like, what am I about to do?
Right. Yeah.
Am I sure I want to do this? It was terrifying. Terrifying. More terrifying than anything else. It just finally, so I said, okay, publish. Okay. And then it occurred to me, first of all, I didn't think anybody was going to pay any attention to it. I was just like, all right, well, I want this out. This is a side project. This is fun for me. Okay.
Now it's done.
It's done.
Wash my hands.
And then she said, well, see if you can get some reviews. It's like I showed us a few people. They're like, wow, this is really good. So I guess they're getting these positive reviews back. I'm like,
well, maybe I like this.
well, I did have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
Should I do another one? Oh my God. What would I write the second one about? Because first one was literally handed to me.
Right.
Meeting Clara, her life, notes from talking with her directly. It just fell in my lap. It literally called to me. Okay. What would I do a second one about? I was completely stressed out. This is not a book with a sequel. I didn't want to do a prequel. That's boring.
Yeah.
And so I was stuck. And then, oddly enough, I had a dream. And I'll show you where this goes. I had a dream. Talk about unraveling threads. I had in this dream, I was walking through a museum and the curators were showing me bowls and crosses and chalices and this and that thing. And it was this weird, wacky dream, right? And I was drawn to one thing in particular. Like I could see a picture of it. It was clear as day, right? And she shows it to me and I pick it up and I look at it and she goes, oh, well, and she names it. And she says, well, that's very, very unusual piece people to gravitate towards, but this is the significance of it, or some facsimile thereof, right? In a dream. I'm paraphrasing what I remember. Right. And I woke up, and then I was like, well, I wonder if such a thing even exists. All right. So I start doing the Google search, trying to find it. Damn if I don't find the exact thing that I saw in my dream. The exact thing. And it's a cavalry mask from the age of Augustus.
And so then you started doing your deep dive research stuff.
So and now I'm learning about it.
Characters in your head.
I'm trying to figure out cavalry. Okay, how does a cavalry mask, cavalry helmet from the age of Augustus end up at a museum in Vienna? What's that about? I didn't really understand, the activity of the Roman Empire around the age of Augustus.
Right.
Never mind to understand what it meant for that whole area of Central Europe. So here we are again. We're back in Central Europe once again. But as I'm pulling on these threads and kind of trying to understand, suddenly I come across this research article talking about the excavations and relatively recent discovery of a port on the Red Sea, Bereniki, which was south of the most popular and well-known port of Mios Hormuz. Suddenly, now there's this whole India trade through the Red Sea, Alexandria, port to the Mediterranean, Augustus fighting the pirates, developing trade with India, bringing in, the culture. Oh, wait. Guess who was there first? Alexander.
And you
go
said,
back to my
perfect.
beach.
Right.
Right.
Perfect. And there you are.
So I'm really jiving on this whole thing. And the fact that in 20 BC, Greek and Latin were spoken on the western coast of India as much as Sanskrit was. And it was taught to people of certain economic classes and interactions. And just, again, like, what? What was going on? And now, if I could go a little bit further with it, it's sort of some of the philosophic thinking in Rome during that time period was under transition. It was getting away from a strict Stoic mentality. And part of the thinking that they were adopting has a lot of similarities to Buddhist philosophies. So wouldn't it be interesting if Augustus, who's one of the longest reigning Roman emperors of all time, who oversee a tremendous transformation of the Roman Empire after the death of Julius Caesar, first real Roman emperor, loved by everybody, a chameleon, an enigma, is somehow being influenced by this Indian relationship in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I am.
That's where you are.
I am 200 pages of research. My notes alone right now are 200 pages.
Oh my God,
long.
It's going to be a trilogy.
There's a lot. I've got a lot of stuff that is like
that you're not going to need. Yeah.
It's color. It's background. It's color. It's going to be like 20 pages of it will be alluded to in one sentence kind of thing.
Right. I know. I understand. I'm just teasing with you though. At 200 pages, I don't know. You might have a trilogy going there.
Right. It could be a life's work right there.
You could be doing this forever.
James Michener, step aside. Here we come.
Here comes Mark Jamilkowski. Wonderful. So do you have a name for it yet?
I do.
Are you willing to share?
I'm toying with the name right now. It's called The Mask of Romulus.
Ooh, I like that.
Mask of Romulus.
I kind of like that. All right.
And there's elements of mysticism, philosophy, geopolitical relations, personal relations. Yeah, it's quite a mix. It's pretty exciting.
Good.
But while I'm doing that,
yeah,
I also created a graphic novel script for The Road to Moresco.
Oh, wow! I've never considered trying to do something like that.
So I saw a YouTube video on how to use ChatGPT. On in essence how to convert a novel into a script.
Right.
They lied. It was nowhere near as easy as what they made it seem like it was going to be. But I've always been a comic nerd.
So this was kind of like a nice little, what else can I do with what I've already done?
Well, I heard your comment about the kind of disruption that history element kind of creates. Like, well, to me, the action sequences, and you can really cut down through a lot of that in a comic form because you're forced to 4 to 6 panels per page.
Right.
And it's really much more the visual that conveys the emotion, that conveys the action. You don't have to have all that. So I launched a Kickstarter, graphic novel, The Road to Moresco. Launched a Kickstarter. I got an artist lined up, but I need funding for that. So there's that.
Well, I understand the funding part. I get it.
Yeah. So being independent is tough.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, I'm also bringing out an audiobook. The audiobook will be out in about 30 or 40 days
And
for it.
did you do it yourself, or did you get someone else being your narrator?
Oh, no. I got somebody who actually knows what the hell they're doing.
Okay, because the way you said that, I thought, oh my gosh, he did that himself. Because I'm right now finally getting one of mine in audio, and yeah, I found a narrator. It was like, there's no way I can do all that. That's way more than I can do. Right?
No. So again, I'm doing this off the side of my desk. I've got my startup that I'm really focused on. I tell you though, Terry, I feel really grateful and I'm really fortunate that these are all projects of passion.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps me going, right? Yeah. Okay. It gets stressful and there's a lot of balls to juggle. And I really wish it was a little easier on the book side, especially. Simple things like, it really shouldn't be that hard to get 100 reviews. Oh, that's all. I'm looking for 100 reviews. That's it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm climbing Mount Everest here to get 100 reviews.
Oh yeah. I put a Facebook post out the other day, and it was this raccoon that looked like they were pleading for food. And I said, this is me begging for reviews.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It is.
Although,
it is.
Again, being new to this whole author game, I recently found out that there are something like 2 million publications a year.
Yeah.
And the average number of units sold is 5.
I know, it's horrible.
So there's a whole bunch of zeros.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch of zeros.
Yeah.
And then you have Reese Witherspoon's pick of your next book, which generates 1,000 sales a week.
So I'm desperately, if you know Reese, let me know, because I'm looking for someone who knows Reese or Oprah.
On my speed dial, right? On my speed dial, absolutely.
Seriously,
she won't talk to me. I'm the wrong type. It's like it's just, she only supports women authors.
Well, I'm not having any more luck, so apparently I'm the wrong kind of woman. I don't know what's going on, but
maybe she'll see this and rectify.
Maybe you never know. Well, Mark, if someone wanted to reach out to you and talk with you about the Road to Moresco, or what you're currently doing, or your graphic novel, or any of that, how do they get up with you?
Probably the best thing to do would be to hit the author website, which is Mark-Jamilkowski-author.com.
Okay. And I'll have that in the show notes. So
great. Yep. I think that's probably the easiest because the blog is there. It's got discussions about my thoughts and my hand wringing with regard to the graphic novel. And it's got a contact thing there. They could ping me through that. That's probably the easiest way to go, because then they could get the whole story.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I'm also on All Author. They can get me on Twitter at Road to Moresco. What else? Goodreads. I'm on Goodreads. Right. I'm on Library Thing. I mean, I got the checklist,
So if you have the checklist, just go to your checklist and reach out to Mark. That's how it's going to work, right?
It's all there. It's always under the Road to Moresco.
Okay.
So there's that, and except for the author website, because I don't know why I had the fortitude to make it, markjamilkowskiauthor.com, but
it's very, very good, because your next book will not be named The Road to Moresco. So that was a very good marketing decision on your part.
This is correct. Right. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today, Mark. I really enjoyed talking with you.
I appreciate you having me with you, Terry. I enjoyed our conversation as well. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.